Welcome to this video on Module 2 Design and Software Process. We are seeing HMI in software process. In that, today we'll see design rationale. Now, what is design rationale? It is the information that explains why a particular computer system is designed that particular way. You might have seen there are differences in the designs of desktop and laptop. There are pros and cons of using GUI and CLI. So that has got a particular reason why there is a GUI for that software, why a particular software is only having CLI. The reason may be the resources which are required to drive the GUI may not be available uh, for that computer system. Now, desktop and laptop, they are having their pros and cons. So somebody may prefer desktop over laptop or laptop over desktop for a particular reason. And this is what is the reason, that logic, that is what is called as a design rationale. It may be hardware or it may be a software. The system will be designed in a particular way with that particular reason, and that is the information. This is what is called as design rationale. Now, the benefits of design rationale. The first benefit is communication throughout life cycle. Now, there may be multiple decisions taken or alternatives selected. One alternative is selected over other, for example. Now, why a particular decision was taken that way? Why out of many alternatives one particular was chosen? The reasons will be communicated by this design rationale throughout the life cycle of the software development or maybe the product development. The next is reuse of design knowledge across products. You might have seen that there is a common fashion of designing applications in a particular suite. For example, Microsoft Office has got many applications like Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. You might have seen that there is a, a common way in which the icons, the backgrounds, the fonts are used in those applications. The shortcuts behave the same way. So there may be a problem identified in designing one particular product, and the solutions for that problem or the design solutions for that problem might have been identified there for solving that problem. Now, if the similar problem is there in some other similar product, the similar design solution can also be reused there, which was identified in the previous product design. It also enforces design discipline. Now, we know that it takes time and efforts for selecting a particular design rationale, and that's why whenever it is selected, all the activities or all the decisions, design decisions for a product, has to be done very much carefully, because that much of time and efforts have been devoted to for selecting the design rationale, and that's why a discipline has to be followed in the design process. It presents arguments for design trade-offs. There are trade-offs made throughout the design process, as just discussed previously. Something may be chosen over some other thing because of various limitations, or maybe the client had said to choose that. Now, that those particular trade-offs will be justified with those reasons. For example, why CLI only was selected? Because the resources to drive the GUI was not available at the client. That may be the reason or the argument why for selecting the CLI only. That trade-off is done. It also organizes potentially large design space. For a particular design problem, there may be multiple design solutions. one may be optimum solution. Now designer may not test and implement all such the designer may not even go to test all such solutions which are present there. One of them may be the optimal solution. Now why that particular solution that he or she has implemented was chosen over some others has to be noted by the designer. So this is how it organizes the potentially large design space. There are multiple options. Now why that particular selected will be noted. So the remaining options are deselected for that particular reason. And this is what is called as the organization. Capturing contextual information. Context is very much so far as the usability is concerned. It increases the usability. You have just seen that GUI has got some advantages over CLI, and CLI also has got some advantages over GUI. Now, if there are no pointing devices available at the client side, or maybe the memory is not sufficient to drive the GUI will not be useful, even though it is attractive, even though it may be easy to understand, that may not be useful. And the availability of those resources is the context. So this is what is called as capturing the contextual information. So based on the context, the corresponding design solution is of whether to use GUI or CLI is selected. Now there are different types of the design rationale. One is called as the process oriented and the other is called as the structure oriented. In the case of process oriented, it is used for recording and structuring the issues deliberated and the decisions made. Now, what are the issues? We'll see in detail further. Issues are the problems, the questions we can say. So the questions which are discussed thoroughly, and based on that some decisions are made. So all those discussions, deliberations and the decision making process will be recorded, and that will be organized, it will be structured in the case of process oriented design rationale. It also preserves the order between the deliberation and decision making process for a particular product. Now this helps generalization of the two things that you have seen, deliberation and decision making, for other products as well. As we have just seen previously, based on a particular issue which is found out in one product, the decisions were made or the solutions were identified. So for that issue in that product, a particular decision was made. Now similar issue if it is found in some other product, we can test whether the previous solution can be used here. That is what is called as the generalization of the previous deliberation and decision. The next type is structure oriented. Now in the case of structure oriented, as we have seen here in process oriented, it simply records and structure the issues and decisions. Here simply recording as it is the issues. This structure oriented process of design rationale, structure oriented type of design rationale emphasizes post hoc structuring of considered design alternatives. What it means, it not only records the issues or the requirements given by the client as they are. The requirements, that means the issues, are converted in the design activities. They are structured in those particular design activities, and those restructuring of the issues are now recorded. That is what is called as post hoc So after the client gives the requirements, first the requirements are converted into design activities, and then the modified or the restructured issues are now recorded. We'll see in detail afterwards. Now there are two examples, or the example systems or approaches which are for each of process oriented and structure oriented. So issue based information system, or IBIS, is the example of process oriented, whereas design space analysis is the approach for structure oriented type of design rationale. We'll see the issue based information system now. Now this is the basis for much of the design rationale research so far. As we have just said, it is process oriented. Now how it is process oriented? So we'll see. So the main elements there are the issues, that means the problems or the requirements posed by the client. Now these issues will be hierarchically organized. There'll be one root issue like this, and that issue may be next connected with some sub issues, and these sub issues may in turn be having some other sub issues and things like that, and so on and so forth. Now there are positions, as can be seen here. Now positions are the potential solutions or resolutions for the issue at hand. For this particular issue, there are two possible positions, the resolutions we can say. Now there are still arguments, as you can see here. So arguments either support the positions, that means the solutions, or they refute the positions or the solutions for a particular issue. That means they may support or they may negate that particular solution considered. And due to these arguments, as they support or negate, the relationship between the issues and the positions will be modified. That means this position responds to this issue, and this particular position, for example, may not respond to this issue because the argument negates that position. That may be one explanation for this IBIS. Now this is the logical arrangement of those issues, positions and argument. To actually use that IBIS, a graphical version called as GIBIS, GIBIS, is used, which allows to graphically design the various issues, the positions and arguments in a particular design phase. Now the same diagram is here, just scale up to be visible. The next type that we have seen approach, we can say, is a design space analysis, that is structure oriented. Previously GBIS was process oriented. Now in the case of design space analysis, there are two approaches. One is called as QOC, the questions, options and criteria, and second is called as the DRL, the decision representation language. In the case of QOC, it's once again one hierarchical structure, as we'll see the diagram depicts. We'll see what are the details here first. So there are questions and the sub questions, as we have seen issues and sub issues previously. So they represent a major issues of a design, and here they are not the issues which are just raised by the client as they are, rather they are stored with respect to the design activities, not as we have just seen the actual issues themselves raised by the client, put forth by the client, or maybe identified in the design analysis, requirement analysis, you can say. Next are the options, which provide alternative solutions to the questions. So in Gibbs there were issues and positions. Here there are questions and options. In Gibbs, in addition to issues and position, there were arguments for each of the position. Similarly, here there are criteria. So questions, options, and criteria. Criteria are the means to assess a chosen option in order to make it a choice, a selected choice. So there are multiple options possible. Each of the options to be chosen, that choice can be made with respect to these criteria. So this is the QoC notation. The question, there may be a main question, and there are various options identified. And for each of the options, there may be that will be verified with respect to different criteria. Now, each of the options will be tested against the criteria. So this particular criterion does not validate this option, but this criterion validates this option. Similarly, this criterion validates this option, and this criterion validates this option. So a solid line like this represents that the option is satisfied based on the criteria. So this criteria validates that option. This option satisfies that criteria, we can say. So these are the solid lines where they indicate that the corresponding criteria validates, or the option is satisfying that particular criteria, whereas the dashed line indicates that that particular option is not satisfied against that criterion. So out of the three options available here and the three different criteria, we can see that this particular option, which is shown to be in a solid box, is satisfying all three criteria, whereas the remaining two options may be satisfying only one or two criteria. And that's why this particular option is shown to be in solid box, that is solid box, and that is the most favorable, that indicates the most favorable option with respect to all the criteria present here. Now for the options present, there may be some consequent questions, as we have seen previously. So it's once again a hierarchical notation, and that consequent questions may be having some options, and those options will be checked or assessed against some criteria, and the thing may continue. So this is also one hierarchical notation, we can say. Some limitations are to be noted. So we have seen that the solid and the dotted or dashed lines, so these lines don't provide all the context of the design trade-off. For example, here there is solid line, here there is dashed line. This line indicates that this criteria is not satisfied by this option. But what is the context in which that criteria is satisfied or not satisfied? For which context it is satisfied? That is not obvious. Once again, we can't, this particular QoC notation can't indicate the importance of different criteria. So the criteria may say that, so there are three criteria justifying one option, or they are satisfying, or the option is satisfying three criteria, and the fourth option is only satisfying one criteria, not these remaining three criteria. But the fourth criteria is so important that it may either make the option chosen or not. So the importance of criteria, a particular criterion, is also very important, and that is not possible to be indicated in this QoC notation. Hence, this QoC notation can't easily identify the most favorable option that is valid for with respect to the importance of the criteria as well as the context. The next approach was DRL, that decision representation language. This is similar to QoC, but with a larger language and more formal semantics. Larger language means there'll be multiple ways in which a question or the options and the criteria or the corresponding elements may be specified, and those things can be specified more concretely in a formal semantics. Here only the difference is that the questions are now called as the decision problems, the options are represented as alternatives, and the criteria are called the goals. The third type is psychological design rational. Now there is something called as the task artifact cycle. Now what is that? So there may be multiple tasks identified, some issues identified, for example. So these are the tasks to be implemented. A product is to be designed for that. So we design one artifact, we design a product, and that is called as the artifact. So that product is designed, that becomes the artifact, and that artifact or that product now supports the tasks which were initially identified. But it is next found out that in addition to those tasks, there are some more tasks which are also specified by that artifact, but maybe with some limitations. Some additional tasks are also satisfied by the same artifact in addition to the main task, but the additional tasks are supported with some lacunae, we can say, some limitations. And to make possible implementing those tasks in the same product, we update the design of that artifact, the product. And whenever that product is updated, the design is updated. So here the arrow is rather improper. The arrow has to be denoting here. So this thing is something like, let me show you properly. So this is the correct notation now. When we have got that updated artifact, that updated artifact is found to support even more tasks with the initial task and the additional task. Now whenever it was updated, it is now identified that it supports all those tasks, but now with those updations in the design, it supports still more tasks which were not identified previously. And this is what is called as the task artifact cycle. It continues. So there will be some modifications for the limited task, and it will support even more tasks, and the cycle may go on. And to support this particular task artifact cycle, psychological design rational is used, because it assumes that this is the task artifact cycle in which user tasks are affected by the systems that the user use. We'll see how. Here, for that, it tests the psychological effects of using the system for the task. So we have seen previously various usability criteria. So these criteria may be used here. Essentially, it aims to make explicit the consequences of design for users. What will be the effect of changing the design for the users? That will be made explicit. Now designers identify tasks system will support. For example, let us take the example of learning a new programming language. How that language works, that's a main task. Now supportive tasks are also identified. What the user is trying to identify, what can I do with that programming language, how that particular approach or that functionality works, how that functionality can be used or can be implemented by me, how can I do it. So these are the tasks or subtasks identified. Now for each of those tasks identified, there are scenarios generated. For example, what can I do? That's a task. And a scenario may be taken to be uh, presenting demonstrations or demos to learn that language. What can I do? So I can have some looping constructs so that I can do some repeating tasks. I can have some decision constructs, so I can have some decisions. So there are some demo programs which will rather indicate how that particular construct can be used with simple programs. And now that the scenarios are generated, the product is given to the users and the users are observed using the system with those particular tasks identified and those particular scenarios identified. Here the psychological claims of systems are made explicit. What does that mean? For example, in the above example, the assumption for the design is that whenever the user knows what demo programs she sees on the screen, she can do it all. So for example, there are demo programs for as you have just seen, simple uh, sequential program, then repetition, then functional program. There may be decision constructs. Different demo programs will be available. So if all the demo programs are visible to the user on the screen, user knows that I can do all these constructs. I can perform the constructs in all those particular ways that she knows. That's an assumption. And the psychological claim here is that the user, because there are demos and they'll be presented to the users, so user learns by seeing those demos. And demos means basically they expect that while using those demos, the user will be doing those things. So user learns by doing. That's the psychological claim. So that's a positive approach of that particular claim. There may be some negative sides of the design if it is not done properly, and that can be used to improve the next iteration of the product design. So what may be the negative aspect here in the previous example? Now there is one demo, but that demo is not interactive. So user is simply presented with a graphical representation of how that for loop, how that while loop, or maybe that if construct works. User is not made to perform those things while the demo is being presented to that user, and that's why user simply sees that he is not required to uh, perform those things on his or her own. And that's why basically there is no nothing there is no learning happening. So that's a negative aspect of incorrectly designing the demo procedure. Demo is not interactive, it is simply one way graphical representation. So this negative aspect can now strike the designer that now the design has to be modified, because the designer sees the users just seeing the graphical demos, he or she is not getting anything out of it what is expected. This is what is called as psychological design rationale. In effect, today we have seen what is called as the design rationale, that is the justification for a particular design for that system, that involves recording the design knowledge, that may be the actual issues given by the users as we have seen in GitBis, or that may be the issues modified with respect to the design activities which we have seen in the next process, which was, for example, here we have seen the QoC notation. and DRL. So that's a modification of those things. We have seen the different types of design rationale, what is called as the process and the structure oriented design rationale. So thank you for patiently listening. And with those resources, the blog and YouTube channel, you can revisit those contents, and that may help you. So thank you once again.